Oh, the woes of being a dominant deck. Domain's taking a hit, and so have I on this bet. Watch us every week to get better, especially in this control-dominant meta.
It only counts if it mounts. Comment below as we walk through the Week 5 recap of Outlaw Standard. Alrighty gang, just a quick bet update. Azorius Control snagged another 3 trophies while Domain continued to falter. Thus, I am up 11-6 on this bet now, and we're nearly halfway to rotation. Max, anything to add to this?
Oh man, Domain certainly struggled when all other decks were aiming at taking it down, right? Now it's Azorius' turn as we begin to see hate going in its direction instead. There's still time for Domain to catch up though.
Oh man, and with that, let's talk about the tier list. Surprisingly, Boros Convoke made the leap to the top with Azorius Control right behind. However, Slogurk is back once more, and Esper Midrange manages to hang on for yet another week.
Oh yeah, and Tier 2 features Domain, struggling to regain its place, a Golgari list on the upswing, Temur Ramp's back and forth performances, and a sneaky finish from Mono Red to squeak on in.
And last but not least, we've got a spicy Brewer's Corner this week featuring Orzhov Blink, Is It Pirates, Golgari Combo, and a full-fledged Phyrexian Invasion.
Rebels, as you know, we've partnered with TOA on our Stay the Meta series. For those of you who aren't already using TOA for your paper tournament needs, click the link below in our description, head on over after the video, check out the store, and while you're there, don't forget to use code REBELLION for 5% off at checkout.
As always, TOAMagic can deliver all your cards in one package with free track shipping on every order and over 1 million fulfilled orders to date. We're all about dependability here at the Rebellion, and we can confirm that TOA gets it done right.
Now on to our Tier 1 archetype breakdowns, starting with Boros Convoke.
Oh man, so mere weeks ago, we were asking the question of whether Boros Convoke has the staying power for the big stage, and here we are, watching Boros Convoke jump to the forefront of Tier 1 with 11 top 8s and 4 trophies across 12 events. Now, most notably, it just took down a 56-player MTGO challenge this past weekend in the hands of Swiftclaw. So let's look at this list and see what shifted. First of all, I know everybody hates Thran Portal, I get it, but you gotta get over it because we needed one more fast land to make the mana base work, and so it's back. We can't have Sundown Pass in this, the lands have to come into play untapped, that's just the way this deck works. Now, I love that we're looking at 4 War Leaders call again, and seeing that push back into the main over a Sanguine Evangelist, yes, 1,000 times yes. This is, in my opinion, dictated heavily by Azorius Control and the need to have those extra pointed damages on impact, forcing them to deal with each individual creature. The one Get Lost here, I know people are going to look at that and be like, why? It deals with temporary lockdown. It gives you a mainboard hedge while also giving you creature removal. Love that as well.
That does make sense. So let me ask you a question about something new to the list. Talk to us about Aven Interrupter. Is this a decent card against like the slick shot show off decks, control? Why is it in here?
I mean, I don't know that it's amazing against slick shot because they're just going to keep being able to recast, but at the same time, I think it's fantastic that we're doing this 3-2-3 split of Invasion, of Gobakhan, Urabrask's Forge, and Aven Interrupter. Like, you are playing a very tempo-oriented game against Azorius Control, and it does counter it for the turn, and that one turn is the pivotal moment in many of these games where you're putting out a decent battlefield and you're like, okay, I have some time, I've got the mana. You could find this off of Knight Errant of Eos, which is very important, and then you can, I mean, it's like being able to find a counterspell with your creature that you're naturally ramping into. So I just think it's a critical component. It's a hell of a piece of tech. I love that it's in this list, and it's going to be the new tech for this weekend.
Yeah, like you said, I love that it builds up the board state in addition to what it's doing. So talk to us now about Azorius Control.
Kenmen Yao's team took down the Team Trio 10K in Indianapolis last week, featuring Azorius Control in the standard seat and netting yet another trophy for the archetype that everyone is struggling to beat. To top that off, Ignotus97 also snagged the trophy in a 95-player MTGO challenge this past weekend. So in total, 3 trophies and 14 top 8s across 12 events solidified Azorius Control as a dominant force for yet another week. Let's talk a little bit about the way this is solidifying. So here we see there's a 3-1 split of Sunfall to populate, but no Farewell. Now personally, I like having that Farewell there, but at the same time, if you need to go a little bit lower on the curve, Sunfall putting it in as the 3rd copy makes a lot of sense. The 3-3 split between Get Lost and March is also something that people are going to argue back and forth. I've played a 4-1-1 split with like March into Get Lost and Destroy Evil, but ultimately those 6 slots are going to rotate between those 3 cards typically, so I don't mind that this is the configuration. The 1 Phantom Interference main, do you want that 5th Normalize effect? I'm not sure. It feels kind of weak. It gets sided out often, but maybe it's correct.
Yeah, and it does give you that 2/2 body in some instances. I don't know. But what do you attribute the recent success of this deck to? Is it really just because we're late into the cycle and right before rotation?
I mean, Control does better once you get to a very deep meta, and especially once you get to a meta like this where we're 3 years in and there's just more time to have developed the necessary answers to the threats. But I'm just gonna put it out there. I think it's Tishana's Tidebinder that really made this deck pop in the end, because Control has consistently had issues answering that wide variety of threats that other decks can put out. But Tishana said, we're going to be able to deal with Temur Analyst. We have answers for Domain. We have tempo that we can put on so that we aren't relying on like a Jace Mill strategy. We have a Jace Mill strategy, but it doesn't have to be the primary point anymore. We can play this almost tempo-oriented post-board game. And so I think to me that was the turning point for the deck.
Yeah, Azorius Control is not slowing down. But let's move to 4-color Slogurk.
So Slogurk has been a puzzle of late, making it to tier 1 multiple times but falling off in intervening weeks. This past week it racked up 9 top 8s and 1 trophy, seen here with CFT SOC 3's list that took down a 23-player MTGO preliminary. Now the question remains, can this list actually push through Azorius Control, especially now that the Control players have solidified on those Kutzil's flankers and the Tidebinders to shore up multiple matchups, and it does a pretty good job shoring up here. That Grave Hate, those trigger counters, it matters a lot to this Slogurk deck. Now the big shift here that I'm seeing is that we have Vorinclex in the main. We've seen a lot of different pieces come in and out there, but it's in on this one. I also love that if you go to the sideboard here, you see these 3 Plan the Heists. That's a piece of tech that I haven't seen in Slogurk before. But in a deck like Slogurk, where you are going to run out of resources if they're efficiently answering what you're doing, the ability to draw 3 after you've plotted it makes a lot of sense to me. You're getting that grind along with like the Jace, the Lily, the Duress. Like you have a lot more grind to this build than you have in the past.
Yeah, wow. I'm watching this deck evolve has been very interesting. I've seen, Bonnie Paul be the top end sometimes. What about that card? Is that card good for the deck? How does that compare to Vorinclex?
So I think either can potentially work. The point with Vorinclex is that you want that big body with reach, and a piece of that is really for Esper Mid, because they're going to land problematic things like Rafine, Fairy Masterminds, and you want to have something that just sits there and goes, you're not swinging through me. I can establish my board presence. You're not going to get me on an air tempo flyers plan. And so Vorinclex coming down a little bit earlier, I think is part of why that made the cut. But time will tell. I do think it does a great job of grinding, and that's what it's there for. It's kind of like how we see Gix's command at the top end of Esper Midrange. Not necessarily because you want to use Gix's command to wipe the board. It just grinds really, really hard.
Yeah, talk about deck with a target on its back. Esper Midrange. Let's talk about it.
So Falcon took down a 19-player MTGO preliminary this past week with Esper Midrange, highlighting it as the only player to snag a trophy with the archetype despite 9 players top 8ing over the week. So let's look at what shifted here. I'm going to first come out and say that I think this is a list that is ideally positioned to beat the mirror. Like, the fact that you're on Wedding Announcements is a big part of the mirror breaker. The 3 virtues of loyalty, that extra 1 or 2 copies of virtue, depending on how your build is huge. The main board Acklazot's Gix is a 1 of back of each of them. Huge. And then you're playing that 3 Fairy Mastermind 4 Bat. The 4 Bat over the 4th Mastermind, again, you're aiming for that mirror breaker. You're trying to disrupt what they have in hand on 3. So I think that's where this list was really positioned, was we're going to win the mirror. That said, I don't love the temporary lockdowns in the sideboard. Like, you already have 2 pest control. Just add more pest control if you're going against Boros Convoke. The lockdowns are going to hit all of your creatures at 2, which is your Wedding Announcement creatures, your Virtues, your Wandering Emperors, your Masterminds, your Bats, your Denix. Like, that's all most of your deck. It's hitting basically everything but Rafine. I don't like lockdown in this sideboard.
That raises a really good point. Yeah, just use pest control. Taking away all the 1-drops is usually enough. But is this the best version of the deck? I noticed, Tidebinder moving to the sideboard. Would you say that this is trying to be more aggressive of a build overall?
I think if you wheel back time about a month to that Pro Tour where it was like 33% Esper mid, this would have been the best version of that deck, because you would have had a version that is really prepared for the mirror. And I played, I was helping out one of the members in the Rebellion Discord test a little bit for the RC coming up, so we were playing Esper mid mirrors, and the difference between our decks was Wandering Emperor was in there, Wedding Announcement was in there, and Virtue of Loyalty was in there. And having those three in higher numbers was the difference in that mirror match. So I think that's really what this is ideally suited for, is we are going to win the mirror. But I don't necessarily love it in a world full of Azorius Control, especially if like Domain comes back. I don't love that build.
Okay. Wow. All right, and that does it for our Tier 1 archetypes. Let's go down to Tier 2, where I'll kick things off with Domain. So Domain has had it pretty rough lately. There's no doubt about that. Since winning the Pro Tour, the target on its back has really kept Atraxa out of the limelight for multiple weeks now. Yamazaki Sho came closest to a trophy this week, losing in the finals of a 16-player Outlaws tourney in Chiba, Japan. Now, despite having a rough week for grabbing trophies, Domain is on the upswing once more, actually snagging 10 top 8s across 12 events this week. So let's talk about the list. We've got 3 Rest in Peace in the side, and is that a sign that Temur Analyst is really that good against us? I believe it is. I was talking last week and the week prior about that matchup being rough. 2 Elish Norns also in the side. Really good against Temur. Really good at shutting down Convoke and the Mirror. Of course, we're seeing 3 long goodbyes total in the full 75. An indication that Esper is still out there, right? We got to have the hate for Rafine. And this just solidifies that we need to hate out Rafine. The breakdown of board wipes, 3 Sunfalls, 3 depopulates in the main with 3 lockdowns in the sideboard. I think that's generally a good choice. And of course, still no Invasion of Zendikars.
Fair. Now, Max, I look at a deck like Domain, and I have to ask, does this deck have a reliable path through Azorius Control, or are we just spinning our wheels here?
Yeah, I'm kind of unsure why Domain doesn't try to hedge more against Control. There are some possibilities, right? You may have to shift over to another one of the colors you don't typically use, like blue, and use some of the cards that typically work there. We were talking about playing the Heist. That's a really cool card. Cryptic Code is still out there. Tidebinder, of course. Of course, you could go black and go more towards the hand hate. I don't know, Duresses, Lilianas. But access to all 5 colors should mean that there are a lot of options available, is really my point. Of course, with those adjustments come the mana base. Do you mess up your curve shifting the mana base the way you have to? So that might be the reason why some Domain players are hesitant to go in that direction. We'll see.
Fair. And it's not an easy answer. You know what I mean? Like, it is a puzzle that people have been trying. I think Athena's put like almost 10 hours plus just trying to mess around with Domain and figure out which way we can do it. And there hasn't been a solution yet, which isn't to say there isn't one. It's just not an easy one to solve. That said, let's go to a deck that also hasn't been easy to solve, Golgari Midrange.
So yeah, Golgari Midrange has similarly struggled to find footing. And while most other archetypes have solidified and are merely shifting the flex slots, Golgari has been built a million ways, and there's still no consensus on who's done it best. Shown here, of course, is the latest iteration to place by X-Whale, who managed to be one of 7 players to top 8 with the archetype this past week. So let's see where they went here. Of course, we're seeing, notably, 4 Broncos. I'm loving that card recently, and I think it fits well in a Golgari shell. Mosswood also here is the 2-drop, and of course Mosswood can power the Bronco. You've also got 3 Hostile Investigators in the main. Obviously Azorius Control has taken over the meta, so this is probably a response to that. And then a 3/3 cut down Duress split for curve purposes. I do like the 6/1 drops. It just feels ideal. And then only 7 3-drops, odd split here. Honestly, when we're talking 3-drops, and I've made it no secret that I prefer to go more graveyard hate with the Trespassers. We're still facing Temur, we're still facing Slogurk, but part of me also kind of wants to lean into Preacher of the Schism. It's been argued that it has great card advantage capabilities, so I don't know. But either way, one Liliana curving into Hostile Investigator seems good.
Yeah, and I mean, we're seeing that split with 1 Trespasser, 2 Preachers, so it's kind of like they couldn't figure out which route they wanted to go, and they just wanted to, like, soft hedge each. I don't know if that's correct. That feels a little wishy-washy to me, but, if you get a trophy, you get a trophy, right? That said, I look at the 4-drop slot, and I see Arcfiend of the Dross, and I have to ask, is that actually what we want there? Because it feels like half the time against like Convoke, you just have to hold it back, and you only have 3 turns to end the game once it hits. And similarly, against Azorius, you could hit for 18 life and lose the game. Even if you hit all 3 times and they don't answer it, you could still just lose the game. So do we really want that at the 4-drop slot?
I think you've definitely hit the nail on the head here. There are so many scenarios where you don't want this card right now in the current meta. Sometimes you'll see this card in the sideboard with Paths of Peril for that anti-aggro combo kill, make it even faster. But I don't think this is the meta for that right now. I'm not sure it's even justified as a sideboard card with the other pieces that you could opt for against, decks like Control and Domain. I probably would opt for something that speeds up the clock even more. That seems to be a good direction to go in. In the past, that's been Sheldred. I would like to see more Bloodletter. The Bloodletters really enable this deck to speed up the clock. It's evasive, and I think it synergizes well with what Golgari already wants to do.
And there is actually going to be a spicy Golgari list later that addresses this exact concern, so make sure you stay tuned. But for now, we're going to talk a little bit about Temur Ramp.
I can't interpret this name very well, but Kenode VT is what I'm going to say. Managed the top 8 in Saturday's 56-player MTGO challenge, becoming one of 6 pilots to top 8 this past week with Temur Ramp. It's a rough fall, honestly. The moment you look into every deck's sideboard, though, you'll figure it out. You'll know where that fall originated. However, let's talk about what the deck is doing differently. Of course, we've got 2 Kellens, gets things started quickly. In the 2-drop slot, being able to lay down lands is important for this deck. You got a 4-2 split of Nissa and Spelunking, which also continues that ramp capability. I like Spelunking here in this deck. I also like really the full set of Ill-Timed Explosion. I really like this board wipe. I think it's a little bit undervalued, but being able to get through your library, also simultaneously blow up the opponent, it can be quite helpful. Going from 4 to 3 World Souls as well. I think part of the reason for that is redundant copies just don't seem necessary. They're kind of inefficient as removal. So leaving that slot for a 4th Virtue seems correct to me.
Fair. Now, I look at this, and I've tested this again in the Discord a fair amount. Shout out to the MTG Rebellion Discord. You guys are great. And I see the T-Rex, Tyrannix Rex. Is it actually better than playing Hullbreakers or playing Thruns? Because I think that's one of the critical slots in this sideboard against Control that you have to understand.
Yeah, we've touched on Tyrannix Rex in the past. I'm thinking of early Domain builds that used to use it. As a win con there, it was relatively weak. I know that the Ward 4 looks very tempting, along with it saying, it can't be countered. But one might be, I really think Thrun is actually a lot better. It's a more formidable card in this sense. When Tyrannix Rex hits the battlefield, it's going to get goat-throated. It's going to get shot down like a sheriff. That's just what's going to happen. And Thrun is so much better for this reason. Not only can it not be countered, but only green permanents and spells affect it. Of course, that's a control breaker to me. That's a much higher bar. It requires a board wipe to get rid of it. Also, it only costs 5. You're casting Thrun much earlier in the game, especially with this deck. I just think the ward on Tyrannix is just too late game. It becomes, ineffective as protection. So, yeah, you have to invest so much to cast it too. So I don't know.
And here's kind of a fun note I'm just going to put out there. If you go the Thrun route, and we found it to be much more effective in our testing, you can keep the ill-timed explosions in, and if I remember correctly, Thrun has indestructible on your turn, so you can push through their Hullbreakers or their Elish Norns, if that's what they're using to keep it at bay. By swinging, they block, and then you just ill-timed for 2 or 3 or 10. It doesn't matter. It can blow up the whole board. Thrun's living through it no matter what, because it's indestructible. So it lets you play into that sequence, which I think is just amazing. But that said, we're going to get to the very final deck in Tier 2 land. Mono Red crept back in. Let's see why.
Oh man, Mono Red has really struggled mightily over the past few weeks, overshadowed by its more explosive cousin, Boros Convoke. However, Wizards 2002 did manage to smash through a 29-player MTGO preliminary, earning that trophy as one of 3 pilots to top 8 with the deck, and really keep Red Dead Redemption faith alive. But let's talk about where the list is positioned. We've got 4 Urbrass Forge in the main. I mean, it's about time we embrace this card as a control mitigator and a must-answer threat. We've got 2/2/2 split of Obliterating Bolt, Scorching Shot, Witchstalker's Frenzy. There is something to be said for variety in your removal. It tends to be a good thing in any meta. We've got a 2/2 split of Hearse and Cemetery Gatekeeper. Is this correct? I'm not sure. Maybe there's the 2 hearses because you need non-creature spells to, push the prowess. I'm not sure. But 2 Cause for control are in the sideboard as well. And then the Furnace Punisher coming back to try to punish Esper. Of course, we've got the 3 Lithomanic Barrages for Esper and Boros Convoke, and the Seed Sharks that you'll tend to see in Domain and Azorius Control builds.
So I look at this, and really my biggest question, Max, is do we need Scorching Shot and Obliterating Bolt right now, or are we just running a bunch of extra removal that's going to be dead game 1 against Control?
Yeah, I do have a feeling about Scorching Shot. I feel like those could just be Witchstalker's Frenzies. Obliterating Bolt, I will say, has kept Acklazotz in sideboards in addition to other cards that have exile removal. It also hits Rafines, it hits Preachers, which are still seeing play. But perhaps the deck could really speed up its clock with more cards like, I don't know, Felonious Rage, Codebreaker, go into the, just be an aggro deck. I don't know. Seems like that would find more success right now than going with that removal suite. But I don't know.
That's fair. And I mean, of the 2, I can see why Obliterating Bolt can make the cut. I mean, if you hit Acklazotz, if you're hitting even those like Aftermath Analysts, if they're playing them aggressively against mono red and they don't really get to wait, once you Obliterating Bolt it, that Virtue of Strength ain't bringing it back. So I can see why you're going to want those bolts. But yeah, the Scorching Shot, if we're not seeing Shelly, I just don't know that we need it. But that said,
right,
we're going to move it right along. My favorite segment every week, Brewer's Corner. Let's kick things off and let's talk a little bit about Orzhov Blink. So, credit goes to Amaz, who 5-0'd a standard league with this list. I had to check it out. I was looking at a few of the different cards that are in it, and I think this has really been built to beat up on Control. Now, I want to clarify. I've played a few games on the ladder with this, and it doesn't matter that we have 3 Temporary Lockdown, 3 Path of Peril, 2 Pest Control. You're still going to lose to Boros Convoke. As astounding as that seems, it happened repeatedly to me. Like, Boros Convoke can just keep pushing. That said, Control, we wiped the floor with them. It wasn't even close. And part of that is that you get these early Hopeless Nightmares. You get the ability to start blinking different permanents with Guardian of Ghirapur, like Novice Inspector and Nurturing Pixie. So you can do this like Hopeless Nightmare, Pixie it back, play it again. Then Guardian the Pixie, then get back Hopeless Nightmare, then do it again. Maybe grab a Hostile Investigator, start blinking that. You can see where there's just this blink value train that's running. And weirdly, the best card in that Control matchup was Braids. Because of all the incidental things you're going to be able to sacrifice to it, you're just going to keep on doming them for an extra 2 points and drawing a card. Like, I had Wandering Emperor out. It didn't matter. They just killed me with Braids over 3 turns. So it was kind of wild.
Oh my god. Yeah, the hand hate is strong in that deck too. Hand hate's coming back, huh? I dig it. I totally do. But let's talk about a surprising deck that came out, Pirate King. Woo! Credit to Oscar D. Fadlala, first place in a 19-player store championship in Paraguay. I'm loving this. I'm loving seeing a Kindred deck do something. And Pirates, I already love that. I have that built. I play it sometimes when nobody's looking. It seems pretty fun. But let's talk about some of these cards. It opts for a faster clock than other pirate decks I've seen in the past. The Goblin Tomb Raider adds to that ability. The deck really gets to take advantage of Voltage Surge, and a card that nobody's looking at, Caught in the Crossfire. Really look at this card if you're playing this deck. Breaches is, I've seen Breaches in Rakdos and other decks, but is really at home here, really able to stretch his legs and push things through. And pushing things through, Schooner is at home here as well for the same reason, synergizing with the Artifact Glove, offering powerful attacks with Breaches in there. And then the One Roaming Throne, it's tempting to put more copies in, but it really just wants to push what the deck is already doing rather than, having the full set and being a little too clunky. And I gotta say, Kitesail Larcenist, great potential for a 2-for-1 there. Really awesome card at home here, of course, in Pirates.
Honestly, Max, you had me at Roaming Throne. The moment I got to see that card in the list, I'm like, ooh, I did get the spicy art, and I do want to play with it. So, yeah, I'm going to take it out for a spin on that alone. It does look interesting, though. Yeah. Like, if we have a control-dominant meta, historically speaking, tempo decks are really strong against that. And this is just the epitome of a tempo deck that is difficult to interact with. So, give it a try. Give it a try. That said, we're going to move things right along. Let's talk about Golgari Combo. Alrighty, so credit to Tori Yuto, trophied a 16-player store championship in Chiba, Japan with this list. Now, this has multiple combos going on, and I love it. Like, they decided they're going to put both combos in the same deck. So we have the usual, like, Caustic Bronco, Shadow of Mortality, Insatiable Avarice combo, right? You have the ability to get Bronco out, then Avarice to bring that to the top of your library, make sure that you saddle, swing, they take 15. Nice. You also have Bloodletter plus Rush of Dread, which for those of you who don't know, you do Rush of Dread, spree it so that they lose half their life rounded up, and then they lose twice that because of Bloodletter, so oops, they're dead. Nice little wombo combo there. On top of that, we have the beginnings of Ornery Tumblewag, which I haven't seen this in Standard yet. I have no idea how good this is. It's like a slightly more expensive Luminarch Aspirant that has the ability to like saddle and start doubling up on counters. I can't tell you if this is good or not. I can just tell you it's spicy, and I really want to know.
I have tested with that card in mono green, and if you're going more for the 1/1 counters build, it's very efficient at getting things going. So, yeah, there's like a 5-power Rhino Brawler that works really well with that card as well. So I'm happy to see it in a list. Very cool.
Alrighty, and let's get to that final deck. Max, tell us a little bit about the Phyrexian Invasion.
Oh yeah, I encouraged Splash for Fixing in the MTGR Discord to submit this because I loved it when I saw it. Apparently the story is this is the deck that they hand off at the LGS that person's a part of whenever somebody doesn't have a deck or shows up without one, and it works. Look, we get to have Skrelv and Grafted Butcher in one deck. Everything you want to push through, you can, including the payoffs for Gix, for Glissa, with Skrelv. This is also a great deck for Virtue of Persistence. Being able to bring those pieces back are really good. And then the highlight here is casting Atraxa without worrying at all about your mana base. You've got 4 Caverns of Soul, you've got 4 Secluded Courtyards, and you've got 4 Seed Cores, all of which can make up for the mana you don't have to cast Atraxa. So, I mean, that's awesome. That's really awesome. And then one card nobody talks about, Phyrexian Censor in the sideboard. Really has the capability to shut other decks down, and nobody is looking for this card. And then, of course, gotta mention the double Elish Norn in the sideboard as well, doing work in the current meta.
I'll take it a step further. That list also has a Phyrexian Obliterator and 4 Tailswipe in the sideboard for that little wombo combo, blow out your whole mana base when you're not looking. Yeah, that's the thing. That got me on a Golgari Midrange mirror like a couple times, and it was devastating. I'm like, oh, we'll win the mirror. And then they just Tailswipe my whole mana base. And that was the end of it. Just,
ouch.
All right. That said, that'll bring us to our final segment, predictions for the upcoming week. Now, Max, we've looked at 12 different archetypes tonight, so let's talk about some predictions going into Week 6 of Outlaw Standard.
So Boros Convoke and Azorius Control are really holding this format hostage, right? Between the two extremes, everyone else is struggling to position favorably. That's not to say there aren't some powerful strategies in the middle, so to speak, but always having to play against these two extremes can really squeeze many a mid-range out of the meta.
Yeah, I mean, you have to contain the most explosive deck in Standard while you're still keeping pace with the slowest one. It's this, like, tricky question that so far no one has answered. I knew Azorius Control was kind of cracked when I beat a mono black deck that sequenced turn 1 Duress, turn 2 Ravenman, turn 3 Lily, turn 4 Hostile Investigator, and I still won that game. That is cracked for a control deck.
Man, that's wild. But, given how dominant these two archetypes are currently, really expect to see the format hedge hard going forward. Next week's going to be interesting. There will be main deck hate cards for each, not just sideboard plans to shore up margins. We already see evidence of this with Mono Red playing the 4 Brass Forge in the main.
I mean, the question to answer this week, everyone, is can anyone brew a list that handles the swarm strategy of Convoke while eloquently burying control before they stabilize? And to that end, my guess is there is a build of Domain to explore. I've played enough midrange to know that despite massive amounts of hate off the sideboard, Wrath effects alone will not stop Convoke from overwhelming us. You've got to capitalize by pushing a board wipe into a threat they can't answer before it kills them. So, Domain has the capability of doing this better than most. You've got Atraxas, you've got the Archangel Wraths. These are very eloquent ways to recover after a Sunfall and just blow them out. I don't know, though. We'll see.
Certainly so. But can Domain find the tools to keep Azorius Control from blowing by it? Will it have to branch strongly into another color like blue or black? Will a tweak like that screw up strategies against other decks? Time will certainly tell, but since I'm rooting for Domain anyway, best believe we'll be experimenting with it over here at the Rebellion.
I mean, Max, I'm not gonna lie. I'm just hoping we see a strong combo list come out. So I'm gonna probably start by checking out that Golgari list from Brewer's Corner to see if there's like an optimal build that isn't just clunky.
Oh yeah, that Bronco certainly beckons. That's a tempting card to want to play with. But with all that, we wrap up this week in Standard. Really, thank you for supporting us. Shout out to our members who support our content weekly. Don't forget to like and subscribe, y'all. This channel only continues to exist with your help, so be sure to show these videos to your testing circles. We'll be back next week with more analysis.
And until next time, Rebels, untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.